Bum, ba, ba, bum. Today we're going to be talking about Unit 4, America in the World, and how all these political parties and manifesto destinies, purchasing an anti-terrorist, all of this is working out for all the Americans. Now, first of all, you're going to need to understand a concept. Now, this concept to the Americans is very familiar because they know it as manifest destiny. Now, manifest destiny is something on the sort of on the lines of like, hey, we are the Americans. We are given a God-given right to go ahead and conquer the entire American continent from all the north of Alaska to the bottom of Chile. That kind of stuff. Well, then, first of all, I'm pretty sure that's the stupidest idea. Conquering the entirety of North America is more realistic than that, too, and even conquering Canada itself is very unlikely, even though they themselves went ahead and wedged Canada in between Alaska and themselves, but they would forever be Canada's hat and pants. I love that line when John Green said in his AP US History Crash Course series where he said, and then we failed to purchase Canada, something on the lines of like, we failed to purchase Canada and we will forever be Canada's pants. God, does he have really great humor, even if it's old. Alright, so, thing about this is that America and the world really did believe in manifest destiny, even going as far ahead to go ahead and paint these pictures of them going and expanding towards the west. Now, how did all this happen anyway? First of all, they went from like 13 colonies to like 14, 15, 16, and then suddenly they just doubled the entirety of the United States of America. Well, like here's the thing, even though the Americans were going ahead and growing up, they went ahead and doubled their population as well too. And, they didn't exactly double their land space. Okay, yes, they kind of did double their land space, but they were like, hey, we just created all these territories, we just created all these states, but unfortunately some of them aren't exactly states, and no one's exactly settled into them yet. Like, apparently you can only become, there was this rule in the Constitution where they said you can become a state if you go ahead and you have enough population within your territory landmass. Like if you have a certain number of people per square mile or something like that, we will let you live here. We'll let you turn into a state that will give you voting rights and yada 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 other etc. kind of things. How did this work out? It didn't exactly work out the best way, but they did encourage people to move to the west, and then they doubled their population, though they didn't double their size. And then suddenly Napoleon, fighting Napoleonic Wars in Europe, was all like, alright, okay, I cannot afford a American colony, so what will I do? I shall give it to the people who can actually use that land, the Americans. If we don't give it to the Americans, we might risk war with them. But if we go ahead and sell that territory towards them, America will be our friends forever. Something on the lines of like, yeah, I want to be BFs with you, America, so please don't attack us. Here's a token of land. Now, the Americans originally went ahead and sent their ambassadors to go ahead to France to just buy this size of the territory, this much territory. I'm sorry, not that much territory. This much territory for like $10 million US dollars. Impressive, right? Well, here's the thing. Then the French came in and said, okay, we'll give you the entire this much land for $50 million. Okay. What the heck? This is such a good deal. And so the American ministers went ahead and bought it. And who was president at the time? Our very own Thomas Jefferson. Now, this is where we go ahead and start talking about political parties. This is the perfect time to talk about political parties. Federalists, and Democratic Republicans. You might remember I said something earlier about in another video about George Washington going ahead and saying, stay neutral within our countries and do not create political parties. Well, that talk about neutrality, strict neutrality, yeah, it worked. The Americans were not getting involved in other wars, unless you count buying France's colonies as getting involved, but no, it doesn't count. But in the sense of like, yeah, no political parties, like federalism, republicanism, that kind of stuff, well then, it just didn't work. George Washington himself probably failed to notice that it already existed when he already published that speech. It already existed. You can't prevent something that already exists. You can't prevent something from existing. You can destroy it, but you can't prevent it from becoming existing. So Federalists and Democratic Republicans have existed for like a while now. And then what did they do about it? The Federalists were all like a national bank, much more federal power, whereas Democratic Republicans are like the humble American, self-providing American who doesn't need anyone else to rely on, not the government, not the state, only himself and his trusty plow. That sounded like a song, but I forgot to sing. Now, the thing about this is that the Constitution required that these elections would go ahead and make something good out of it. The thing is, John Adams is the Federalist and Thomas Jefferson is a Democratic Republican. The Constitution also used to say that the second most voted person on the presidential election would become the vice president. This becomes a problem when the president and the vice president is from two opposing parties. That's a really big problem. So, yeah, I can imagine how they changed how much they wanted to ratify the Constitution afterwards. Now, they have the vice president and the president have to become running mates to be able to go into the election, which makes a whole lot more sense, you know? So John Adams' presidency was just George Washington's presidency, just a little bit less glamour, whereas Thomas Jefferson decided he wanted to try something new, and where John Adams was all like implied powers, like the Constitution doesn't say I can do this. In fact, it doesn't say anything about this at all. But I think this part is implying that I can do it myself. And Thomas Jefferson was like, hell no, implied powers, if they're not in the Constitution, I'm not doing them. But then he bought the Louisiana Purchase, and the Constitution said nothing about the president being able to buy land. So he was in a little bit of a pickle here, but then he said, okay, this is for the greater good. And also, I think you could add something in the Constitution that says I can buy land. To this day, I haven't read the Constitution yet, and honestly, it's just not worth reading. It's just terrible handwriting. Spacings, you know, it could really work. And suddenly, America doubled in size. Now, if you want to know how much that money is, like $50 million for this much land, this is more like... this is on the sense of like, alright, I'm buying the entirety of Disneyland for the cost of a PS5 and 3 video games. See? That's incredibly cheap, right? Well, yeah, that's the Louisiana Purchase in a nutshell. And then they started going ahead and started creating Manifest Destiny. And then with this Manifest Destiny in mind, they went ahead and created the best ideal situation for them ever. But then the British had to come in and they're all like, alright, man, okay, so here's the thing. Here's what the border looks like. And they went ahead and said that the rivers look like this because their map said so. But then it didn't exactly look like that, and it actually looked like this. And eventually they realized it was just 3 lakes, not like one entirely big lake. So what did they do in the end? Well, they went ahead and resolve the border issue of like straight line. And then, yeah, straight line. Everyone wanted to go for a straight line, but then when they reached the Oregon Territory, the British were like, okay, we could try a straight line, but then the Americans were like, no, we want all of this, and eventually they did settle on a straight line, which is why America looks so straight on top today, and makes us look like makes them look like Canada's pants. Why did I say us? Probably because I want to become an American. Currently today, the Oregon Territory looks like this. So it's actually called the Washington State now, and their flag has Washington's face on it. Very hard to draw, I know. But that is what the Manifest Destiny became. And then, of course, the Constitution created this. They needed a good transition of power. And when the Federalists lost the election to the Democratic Republicans, they were wondering if they would actually be able to go ahead and transfer power peacefully towards them. And success! They went ahead and did give the Democratic Republicans peaceful powers passing on. Where they went ahead and passed the power on. This was a show that Americans have passed the test, and that this will be happening for like centuries to come. And one more thing I do want to talk about is that the Supreme Court was created, and one of the leading justices of the Supreme Court, the first Supreme Court, was John Marshall, who was a Federalist. He was a court justice during Jefferson's time, and he's a Democratic Republican, so he tried to court martial. He tried to get Madison out. He tried to get like John Marshall out, but then John Marshall decided that this was not supposed to happen. Then he tried to get impeached out of the Supreme Court because the country is just 12 years old, like less than 30 years old. So pretty much all the Supreme Court justices are still fresh out of the tank. Which is a pretty big thorn in this, pretty big thorn in the sum for like Jefferson. And then, of course, that went ahead and showed all the Federalists to be a bit more liberal in their decisions, just so that they can keep their job. John Marshall himself eventually went ahead and got this nominee of someone for the candidate who was the Federalist. And then the Democratic Republican Congress was all like, hell no, this is not happening. And then John Marshall was all, and then one of them sued for his commission. And then he was all like, Thomas Jefferson was like, I don't want a Federalist on my cabinet or my court martial stuff. And John Marshall was called in and he said, all right, so he did have a right to his commission, but the Constitution that says that he did have a right towards his commission is unconstitutional. So no, he does not have a right of constitution. The Congress created an unconstitutional law. I hereby strike down that law. Now, this was the first time this went ahead and gave the Supreme Court the power to go ahead and call laws unconstitutional. And obviously, this wasn't implied in the Constitution. But John Marshall just sacrificed a small gain of Federalist cabinet for a Democratic Republican president for a super big power for the Supreme Court to be able to go ahead and say that one law is stupid and that it is unconstitutional. That's the impressive thing about this entire thing. So, and what did the Americans say about the rest of the world? Well, they said, we're gonna stay neutral. Yeah, we're gonna stay neutral. I don't want anything to do with you, Europeans. I'm gonna stay here, do nothing. And that's just about it. That's Unit 4 in a nutshell. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And so, until next time, Shihana, peace. Bye-bye. Peace out, people. Manifest Destiny.